We do have a lot of content to get through, and unfortunately, I will be talking at you a lot. I know that's not the best for learning, but we do have a lot of information that we need to cover and we need to pass on to you today. So I do apologize in advance for that. Just a reminder that today's training session forms part of a broader range of trainings that we're doing on all of the program changes that come into effect this fall. Now, when it comes to the risk management plan sessions, we recommend only attending the sessions for your specific risk management plan because there are different requirements depending on which plan you're in. Now, of course, you might be interested to know what SARs in plan A and B have to adhere to in terms of the program requirements. You're welcome to attend those sessions, but just to keep in mind that if you do attend those sessions, you as SARs in plan C, your requirements are different to those SARs that are in plan A and B. So you only have to follow the requirements for your specific risk management plan. So you're welcome to attend the other sessions, but the only requirements that your SAR has to follow and adhere to are ones which are specific to risk management plan C. So we're going to start off by looking at the risk management plans in part 1 of the session, and we'll be focusing, like I said, on plan C specifically. Now you can find an overview of all of the risk management plans in Appendix 2 of the new sponsorship agreement. So you as SARs should have received that sponsorship agreement, the new version, via email on August 31st, 2023 from ISCC. And if you look at Appendix 2 of the new sponsorship agreement, you'll see the screenshot that's on your screen right now. And you'll be able to see what the requirements are for SARs in plan A, plan B, and plan C. Now, because you are in plan C, you only have to follow the requirements for plan C. And when you look at this chart in Appendix 2 of the agreement, you'll see and you'll notice that the plans have 5 components. They have a application requirements component, a pre-arrival verifications component, a post-arrival monitoring component, a reporting requirement, and a training requirement. And the details of each component differ from plan to plan. We're going to go through each of these components in detail, specifically as to how they relate to plan C. But if you want an overview of the other requirements for the other risk management plans, please do refer to Appendix 2 of the sponsorship agreement. Now, these risk management plans are scheduled to be implemented on November 1st, 2023. And November 1st, 2023 is also when the new forms and guides and the permanent resident portal are also scheduled to launch. There is a grace period for the implementation of the risk management plans. That grace period runs from November 1st, 2023, all the way up until December 31st, 2023. So if you would like, up until the end of this calendar year, up until December 31st, 2023, you can basically keep submitting applications to Rocco as you do now. But for any applications that are submitted after the grace period comes to an end, so any applications submitted from January 1st, 2024 onwards, you do have to adhere to the requirements of your risk management plan. And for you, it would be risk management plan C. Now, if you're curious to know how many SARs are in each risk management plan, I think we're at, by last count, 141 SARs across the country. 102 SARs are in risk management plan A. There are 18 SARs in risk management plan B. And of those 18 SARs in risk management plan B, 14 of those are new SARs. 2 of those 18 SARs in plan B were assessed based off their organizational assessment as being in plan B, and 2 SARs indicated to ISCC that they don't intend to submit any new sponsorship applications, but they will support their existing caseload, so they were placed into risk management plan B. And in terms of plan C, there are 19 SARs in plan C. Now, our understanding is that those 19 SARs in plan C, they were placed into that risk management plan not because they were assessed as being or having elevated risk. They were only placed into risk management plan C because they weren't able to provide the audited financial statements. So that's just an overview of the risk management plans, as well as a breakdown of how many SARs are in each risk management plan category. What we're going to do now is we're going to focus specifically on the requirements for Plan C. Now, Plan C does have some changes compared to what the usual process and procedure you're familiar with right now. So if you're submitting an application to ROCA right now, the requirements that you will have to follow once the risk management plans are implemented and once the grace period comes to an end will be different to what you're used to now. And we're going to highlight those differences and go through each component in detail. So in terms of the application requirements component, the first component of the risk management plans, one of the main changes is that you as SARs will now have to submit settlement plans and proof of funds with each application that you submit to ROCA. Now, this is a big change from what you're used to now, especially if you've been a SAR for more than 2 years and your agreement is older than 2 years, because whilst you still had to complete a settlement plan, if you had been a SAR or if you are a SAR for more than 2 years, you don't necessarily have to submit that settlement plan with each application to ROCA. But when these risk management plans come into effect, you will have to submit settlement plans to ROCA for each application and proof of funds for each application. And we'll look at the new settlement plan form as well as the proof of fund requirements in part 2 of this session. So in terms of application requirements, there is some change. You will have to submit a settlement plan and proof of funds with each application to ROCA. The new requirement for SARs in Plan B and C, there will now be pre-arrival verifications. So your cases will have the potential of being randomly selected for pre-arrival verification. And we'll look into what pre-arrival verification is and what that process will look like a bit later on in this presentation. The other major change for SARs in Risk Management Plan C is the frequency at which your cases are monitored by ISCC will change. So at the moment, your cases have the potential of being randomly selected every 3 months for monitoring. That frequency will change. So instead of it being 3 months, that frequency will change to every month. It's not necessarily the case that you will be monitored every month. It's just that there is the potential for RSAT to randomly select your cases for post-arrival monitoring activities on a monthly basis, as opposed to now when they do it every 3 months. The next change is the reporting requirements that you're used to will also change. So at the moment, you submit your annual report to ISCC at the end of each calendar year. And that annual report summarizes your activities for that calendar year, as well as your allocations projections for the next calendar year. Now, you'll still have to submit that annual report at the end of each calendar year, but what you'll now have to do is you'll also have to submit quarterly settlement reports to ISCC. So you'll be submitting settlement reports to ISCC every 3 months. In terms of training requirements, they remain the same as they are now. So if you have any individualized training needs, if you need assistance with training any CGs or co-sponsors you work with, if in the organizational assessment summary that you received on August 31st that informs you what risk management plan you're in, if there were any training needs highlighted in that summary by ISCC, please reach out to your local RSTP trainer and we'll be more than happy to facilitate and assist you with that training. But the training requirements remain the same. They're basically done on an individualized basis and on an ad hoc basis. Now, I know it may seem overwhelming with all of these new changes that are part of Risk Management Plan C, and I understand it is a big change from what you're used to now, but we will be providing a breakdown of all of these components as we go through this session. So we will look into these components in more detail later on in the session. And there will also be additional follow-on training offered by RSTP in the winter of 2024, specifically around the pre-arrival verifications as well as the additional reporting requirements. Before we look into the requirements of Plan C in more detail, before we go into those 5 components in more detail, what we're going to do first is we're going to look at the specific sections of the sponsorship agreement where elements of the risk management plans have been incorporated. Now, you should have received a copy of the new sponsorship agreement. in that information package that was sent out to ISCC, by ISCC rather, on August 31st, 2023. It was sent out to all SARs, and one of the attachments to that email would have been a copy of the new sponsorship agreement. Now, I'm sure you're aware, but just as a reminder, the new sponsorship agreement goes into effect on October 10th, 2023. And if you're looking at the sponsorship agreement, hopefully you've had a chance to look through it, and you're looking for specific information related to the risk management plans. You need to really look in two sections of the agreement. The first is Section 5, and Section 5 outlines that the organizational assessment process, which you as SARs went through last year in 2022, when you had to complete that form, which detailed how your SARs operated, you had to go through that specific RSTP training. What Section 5 states is that process is now part of the 5-year sponsorship agreement renewal cycle. So every 5 years, when the sponsorship agreement is scheduled to be renewed, you will have to go through that organizational assessment process again. And that applies to all SARs, regardless of which risk management plan you're in. So in 2027, 2028, the organizational assessment process will run again, and all SARs will have to go through that process again. And the organizational assessment process is tied to the 5-year sponsorship agreement cycle. And once you've been through that process, what will happen is ISCC will also do another operating risk analysis, and you may be assigned into a new risk management plan. So there is the potential that even though you're in Plan C now, we'll talk about it a bit more on the next slide, but there will be 2 opportunities for you to move between risk management plans, and the later opportunity will be when you go through that organizational assessment process again. So that's the first part of the sponsorship agreement, which incorporates elements of the risk management plans. The second is Appendix 2. So you remember that screenshot that we looked at a couple of slides ago, which details the requirements of each risk management plan? That is taken from Appendix 2 of the agreement. So if you want an overview of all of the requirements for all of the risk management plans, you can look at Appendix 2 of the agreement. Now, before we move on from the sponsorship agreement, I just want to highlight 2 more things. The first is that the fee that you can recover for any direct admin costs that you as SARs incur as a result of submitting applications to ROCCO, when the new agreement comes into effect on October 10th, 2023, you'll be able to charge $525 per application. So it's currently $250, and up until October 10th, you can still only charge that $250 per application to cover any direct admin costs associated with submitting applications to ROCCO. But as of October 10th, when that new agreement comes into effect, the amount jumps up to $525. Now, the reason why we're mentioning that here is, if you remember last year when ISCC was sharing information about the organizational assessment process and SARs raised concerns about the cost of getting audited financial statements, one of the things that ISCC said is that any admin fees which SARs collect in order to cover the cost of any expenses incurred with submitting applications to ROCCO, those admin fees could be put towards the cost of getting an audited financial statement. So any admin fees which you've collected, let's say you come to the next review cycle in 2027, 2028, any admin fees that you've collected up until then could be put towards the cost of getting an audited financial statement. So that's why we just wanted to highlight the increase here, because you can use it and put any fees that you do collect towards the cost of getting an audited financial statement at the next review cycle. The second thing that the agreement states in relation to the risk management plans is that there will be a mid-cycle review. That mid-cycle review will happen 2.5 years into that 5-year process. So in 2.5 years, if SARs in Plan B or C, if there's no concerns that have been identified via the pre-arrival verification process or the post-arrival monitors, there will be the potential for you to move into a lower risk management plan. So if you remember on the previous slide, I spoke about the two opportunities that you'll have to move into a lower risk category. The first will be via the mid-cycle review that will happen 2.5 years into the process. And the second will be when you go through that whole organizational assessment process again, when the sponsorship agreement is scheduled to be renewed. So moving on from the sponsorship agreement, we're going to look at all of the 5 components of Risk Management Plan C in more detail. So we gave you a brief summary a couple of slides ago, and we're going to look at each one of those requirements in more detail for the rest of part 1 of the session. And we're going to start off with the application stage requirements. As I mentioned a few slides ago, there is some change for SARS in Risk Management Plan C when it comes to the application stage requirements. You will be required to submit a settlement plan as well as proof of funds with each application that you submit to ROCCO. And we're going to look into the settlement plan as well as the proof of funds requirements in more detail in part 2. Now, I understand this is a big change for you in terms of SARS and how you operate, but there will be supports provided by RSTP, by your local trainers to help you manage through and get through this change. So if you do have any questions about proof of funds, if you have any questions about what requirements you as SARS in Plan C have to follow, please do reach out to your local RSTP trainer, and we'd be more than happy to talk through these with you. But we will be talking more about the settlement plan and proof of funds in the second part of the session. The second of the 5 components is the pre-arrival verifications. And as SARS in Plan C, there is the potential that IOCC may ask for pre-arrival verifications for a randomly selected case or cases. So you as SARS, your cases have the potential of being selected randomly for pre-arrival verification. If you do receive a pre-arrival verification request, what IOCC will be asking you to do is to verify that 100% of the funds are available and that an updated settlement plan is provided. Now, these pre-arrival verifications will only apply to any cases or applications submitted on or after January 1st, 2024. So that's the key thing here. So these pre-arrival verifications will only apply to any of your cases that you submit to ROCCO as of January 1st, 2024. In terms of when these pre-arrival verifications will occur, in terms of what stage of the application process, they will occur once the medicals have been conducted and before travel is arranged and before the refugees travel to Canada. So that's the stage at which it will occur. It will occur in the post-medical stage of the application and before the refugees travel to Canada. Now, again, just like to emphasize here that it only will apply to cases submitted on or after January 1st, 2024. Now, because it only applies to cases submitted on or after January 2024, depending on processing times, you might not feel the effects of these pre-arrival verifications for some time, especially because it's going to be conducted at that post-medical stage of the application process. So what RSTP will be doing in January and February 2024, we'll be doing specific training for SARS in Risk Management Plan B and C that have to adhere to these pre-arrival verification requirements. And we'll go through the requirements in more detail, and we'll look at exactly what you need to submit in response to a request for a pre-arrival verification. We've also been informed by IOCC that the email that you'll receive as SARS, if one of your cases is randomly selected for pre-arrival verification, that email will also have very specific instructions on exactly what you as a SAR are being asked to provide. And you'll be given 30 days to respond to that email, which requests a pre-arrival verification. So that's pre-arrival verifications. And like I said, we'll be going into this requirement in more detail in follow-on training that we'll be doing in winter 2024. So please keep an eye out on your emails for the details of those sessions once we've scheduled them and we start promoting them. The third component of the risk management plans is the post-arrival monitoring component. Now, as I mentioned before, there's a slight change in the frequency of how often your cases may be randomly selected for post-arrival monitoring. So currently, the frequency is every 3 months. That will be changing to every month. So your cases will have the potential for being randomly selected for post-arrival monitoring every month. Now, in terms of the actual process of what post-arrival monitoring looks like, that won't be changing. The timelines, the process that is currently in effect now, that will remain the same. It's just the frequency at which your cases may be randomly selected will change from every 3 months to every 1 month. So if your case or a number of cases are selected for post-arrival monitoring, you'll still receive that request for information letter from ISCC, and the timelines and the procedures outlined in the case review process document will still apply. Now, you'll see there's a hyperlink on this slide to the case review process timeline document, and it will take you to that overview of the case review process timeline, which is hosted on the RSTP website. So the only change when it comes to post-arrival monitoring is the change in frequency. So instead of every 3 months, it will change to every month. In terms of reporting requirements, there's also a change here, like we mentioned earlier. The change is that you will have to provide quarterly settlement reports to ISCC, in addition to the annual report that you provide at the end of each calendar year. Now, we'll also be doing detailed follow-on training around this new reporting requirement, specifically on the settlement report that you, as SARS in Plan C, will have to submit 4 times a year. We'll be doing follow-on training on that, as well as the pre-arrival verifications in winter 2024. So please keep an eye out on your emails when details of those sessions go out. Training requirements, like we said earlier, there's no change here. It's individualized on an ad hoc basis as needed. And again, I invite you to please reach out to your local RSTP trainer if you do have any training or support requirements, and also to please review your organizational assessment summary, because ISCC may have highlighted some specific training needs for your SAR. And again, if your SAR does have specific training needs, please do reach out to your local RSTP trainer, and we'll be happy to facilitate that. So those are all of the components of the risk management plans, specifically as to how they relate to Plan C. So on November 1st, 2023, there'll be a number of forms launching, a number of new forms. A lot of the changes in relation to the risk management plan, they will be reflected in the new sponsorship undertaking and settlement plan, the IMM 5373 form. Now, we'll talk about this in a bit more detail when we actually look at this form, but at the moment, you as SARS, you currently complete a separate sponsorship undertaking form, as well as a separate settlement plan form. So you're completing the undertaking, the IMM 5373 form, but you're also completing the settlement plan form, the IMM 5440 form. Now, when the new forms launch, SARS in risk management plans B and C will be completing one form that combines both the undertaking and the settlement plan into one form. And that form will be the undertaking and settlement plan, the IMM 5373 form. I'll show you what it looks like in a few slides, but just be aware, as of November 1st, 2023, you won't be completing a separate settlement plan and a separate undertaking form. They will be combined into one form because there is one form for SARS in risk management plan B and C. There'll also be a new appointment of representatives in the expected community of settlement form, so the IMM 5956 form. And the main changes being made to this form are so that they mirror the changes that are being made in the settlement plan form. And we'll look at some of these changes in a bit more detail in the coming slides. There'll be a new change of contact form, a IMM 0193 form, and you'll specifically use this form, it's a new form, when you want to change your main contacts and signing authorities that you have on file with ISCC. So if somebody at your SAR, who's a main contact or a signing authority, they leave their position or they move on to another role, and you need to change signing authorities, and main contacts, you will need to use the change of contact form, the IMM 0193 form, and it's a new form that will specifically be launching for this change of contact procedure on November 1st, 2023. There'll also be a new application guide. So a new guide which incorporates all of the requirements of the risk management plans, has details on the proof of funds requirements, details on how you complete all of the new forms that are launching. That will also be launched, scheduled to be published on November 1st, 2023. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to look at the new forms in a bit more detail. And instead of showing it to you on a slide, what I'm actually going to do, if you give me a moment, is I will pull up the actual form just so that we can look at it in a bit more detail and you have a better sense of what the form actually looks like. So if you remember, when the new forms launch on November 1st, 2023, there will be one combined sponsorship undertaking and settlement plan form. Now, this is what it looks like. This isn't the final version of the form. ISCC is still working on some of the programming, so we're not able to share physical or electronic copies of the form with you, but we can give you a sneak peek at what the form looks like. And I would just ask to not take any screenshots or not try and screen capture this part of the presentation, just because we're only able to share this with you for training purposes. It's not intended to be shared broadly amongst the sponsorship community because it's not the final version of the form. So you'll be submitting one combined sponsorship undertaking and settlement plan form. And Section A of the form is basically the same as what it is now. So you'll put the details of your SAR in, the name of the signing authority, and then you'll specify whether you're working with a constituent group on this particular application, provide their details, whether you're working with a co-sponsor, either an individual co-sponsor or an organizational co-sponsor. Section B of the form is also the same. That's where you'll you'll provide the details of the refugee applicant, starting off with the principal applicant, and then going on to list anybody that meets ISCC's definition of a family, specifying their relationship to the principal applicant, and whether they are accompanying or not accompanying. So Section A and B of the form are the same. The linked application section is also the same as what you're used to now, and it's the same as the current form. The changes start happening from Section C onwards. Now, if you remember in the current IMM 5373, the obligations, consents, and declarations section of the form is Section D, but that's now moved up to Section C in the new version of the form. So you'll see the same obligations, consents, and declarations section as you're used to in Section D of the current form. And then what happens in Section D is you have to specify what risk management plan you're in. And the reason why you have to do that is SARS in Risk Management Plan A, they're not going to be submitting this combined undertaking and settlement plan form. They still have to complete and submit a separate undertaking and a separate settlement plan. It's only in SARS in Plan B and C that have to complete this combined undertaking and settlement plan form. And you need to specify that you're in Plan C because the form is dynamic. And once you select that you're in Plan C, the entry fields and the information that you need to provide will be specifically for your risk management plan, and those specifically be for SARS in Plan C. One of the changes, as you'll see as I scroll down, is the settlement needs checklist has been expanded. So if you remember the settlement needs checklist that currently exists on the IMM 5440 form, it's just one big table which details all of your, as well as your CGs and co-sponsors, settlement responsibilities. That checklist is now broken up into specific time periods which run over the course of the sponsorship period. So you'll see here, there's specific tasks that need to be done over the duration of the sponsorship period, specific tasks that need to be done pre-arrival once you receive the NAT or the notice of arrival transmission, specific tasks that need to be done on arrival and within the first few weeks, tasks that need to be done within the first few months after arrival, 4 to 6 months after arrival, 7 to 9 months after arrival, and then 10 to 12 months after arrival, leading into the transition to month 13. Now, all of these responsibilities are in this extended settlement needs checklist. They're not new responsibilities. It's stuff that you, as well as your CGs and co-sponsors, have been doing already. It's just ISCC has been more specific into when some of these should occur throughout the duration of the sponsorship period. So that was one of the concerns that we heard when we did the training for Risk Management Plan B earlier this week. One of the SARs was concerned that ISCC is imposing all of these new requirements on SARs, specifically through this extended settlement needs checklist. It's not anything new. It's stuff that you, as well as your CGs and co-sponsors, have been doing for a number of years already with all of your cases. It's just that the settlement needs checklist is a bit more explicit. It details each of the tasks as well as when they should ideally occur in the sponsorship period. So that's the first major change on the form. The second major change is the financial needs checklist. So you specify in the same way the two categories of wrap, like you'll be providing a one-time startup costs, ongoing monthly support. But what you also need to do is provide details of how much money is specifically allocated to each of those categories. So based on the information that we've inputted in section B, let's say we're sponsoring a single refugee. So what should happen is it auto-populates saying that we are sponsoring one person, and the minimum amount that we need for this individual is $16,500. Now, if you're not used to Group of 5 and community sponsor applications, this will be new to you as SARs. Now, with what you would have to do is when you're preparing your application and you're completing this part of the undertaking and settlement plan, you will need to use the sponsorship cost table in Appendix A of the new IMM 5413 guide and use those figures, and we'll talk a bit more about those in detail in the coming slides when you're completing this cost estimate on the undertaking and settlement plan form. And then what happens on arrival, when the refugees arrive, you're still using the RAP rates for the actual levels of support that you'll be providing once the refugees arrive in Canada. So you're now having to work with two sets of figures. You'll be working with the sponsorship cost table when you're preparing your applications in the same way that Group of 5s and community sponsors do. But on arrival, the actual level of financial support you're providing will be based on the RAP rates. So when you're completing the undertaking and settlement plan form, please use the sponsorship cost table that will be in the new IMM 5413 guide once it's published to complete this section. You then have to indicate like where the funds are held. Are they held in trust? And we'll talk more about this later on in the presentation. And then you'll be able to sign the form. So that's what the new undertaking and settlement plan form looks like. There's the extended settlement needs checklist. There's the expanded financial section where you'll have to use the sponsorship cost table to provide a breakdown of the budget. And there's also the dynamic features of the form, which, depending on what risk management plan you're in, that the form will change depending on what you select here in section D. Okay, so moving on to the IMM 5956 form, the appointment of representatives in the expected community of settlement form. I'm not going to pull this form up because there's only one major change here. It's pretty much the same form as you're using now. The only change is the extended settlement needs checklist that we looked at. That has also been introduced into the IMM 5956 form. So you'll be working with the extended settlement needs checklist in the undertaking and settlement plan form, as well as in the appointment of representatives in the expected community of settlement form, if you have to deal with a secondary migration, or if you're working with refugees that settle in a town or city or a community of settlement where you don't have CGs or co-sponsors. The narrative questions are still relatively the same on this form. The only major change is the extended settlement needs checklist has now also been included on this form. Now, the new form, which will be launching on November 1st, 2023, is the change of contact form, the IMM 0193 form. Now, you would only use this form if there's a change in signing authorities or main contacts, and you need to inform ISCC of that change. So what you'll see on the form when you open it, you'll provide basic details of the new signing authority or main contact, but there's also a checklist for supporting documents that must be submitted to ISCC with this form. It's the usual documents that you're used to if you've been through the process of changing your signing authority or main contact. So it's proof of Canadian citizenship or registered Indian status or permanent resident status, a copy of a criminal record check, the sponsor assessment form, the IMN 5492. The new requirement is there will be a specific RSTP training course that the new signing authority or main contact will have to go through, and they will have to include a copy of their completion certificate for that course with the 0193 form as part of the supporting documents. Now, the training course, it's based off the PIF SAR renewal course that you all went through when you were going through the organizational assessment process. So it'll follow the same format. There'll be bite-sized modules that will take you like half an hour to 45 minutes to get through. The overall course will take you a couple of hours to get through. It'll be self-study. You can do it at your own pace, and the certificate is automatically generated. So that will be launching on November 1st, a new course, once the to coincide with the launch of the new forms, and specifically the new change of contact form, the IMN 0193 form. Now, as we mentioned earlier, the 5413 guide will also be updated to incorporate elements of the risk management plans. There will be information about the proof of fund requirements that we're going to look into in a moment. There'll be requirements, or there'll be information about how you complete the new forms. There'll be information about the change of contact process, and there will also be specific information about each risk management plan and the different requirements. It is scheduled to be published along with the new forms on November 1st, 2023. And the guide will follow a similar structure that you're used to now. There'll be a contents table at the front, which is hyperlinked, and there'll be a document checklist, and that document checklist will also be specific to each risk management plan. So you can use that checklist when you're putting your applications together, just to make sure you've included all of the supporting documents and forms that you need to for your specific risk management plan. And there'll also be some information in the guide about the pre-arrival verification process. Okay, so now moving on to proof of funds. This is one of those changes for SARS in Risk Management Plan C, because at the moment, you as SARS do not need to provide proof of funds with your applications that you submit to ROCCO. But as we looked at in the first part of this presentation, one of the requirements for SARS in Plan C is, in addition to submitting a settlement plan as part of that combined undertaking and settlement plan form that we just looked at with each application, you also have to provide proof of funds with each application. Now, it's a new requirement for SARS in Risk Management Plan C, and you would use the sponsorship cost table, which will be in the appendix of the new IMN 5413 guide, to create an estimated budget. It's not the actual amount of financial support that you would provide once the refugees arrive in Canada. It's just an estimate based on the cost table. And I'll show you what the cost table looks like on the next slide. The important thing to remember is when you're providing that breakdown of the estimated budget in the financial part of the new sponsorship undertaking and settlement plan form, please remember it's just an estimated budget. It's not the actual amount of financial support that you're expected to provide when the refugees arrive in Canada. The actual level of financial support when the refugees arrive in Canada is still based on the resettlement assistance program rates. So like I said earlier, you're going to have to work with two sets of tables. You work with the sponsorship cost table when you are preparing your applications. When the refugees arrive in Canada, you have to provide financial support according to the prevailing RAP rates in the community of settlement. And we'll talk a bit more about the cost table and why you have to use the cost table and not the RAP rates when you're completing the form, and the reasons for that on the next slide. Now, before we look at the sponsorship cost table, we just want to talk about a couple of things related to proof of funds, just as reminders, because I'm sure this is all information that we already know. And this information is pulled from the new IMM 5413 guide, specifically from Appendix A. So as we all know, the funds cannot come from the refugees either directly or indirectly. And it's something that we're used to. It's one of the principles of the PSR program that refugees should not be contributing and should not be expected or required to provide funds to their sponsors in order for them to be sponsored. And that's just reiterated at the top of Appendix A of the new guide. Some of the things that you can do to ensure that the funds aren't coming from the refugees, either directly or indirectly, and that will also help you when you're demonstrating proof of funds with each of your sponsorship applications that you submit to Rocco, is to document your organization's fundraising activities, if you engage in fundraising activities, if funds are being transferred to you by your CGs or co-sponsors for the sponsorship, make sure it's done through means which are traceable and through ways that you can provide documentation to show where the money came from. So avoid using cash donations, use e-transfers, use bank transfers, use checks, use a traceable method so that you have documentation to know exactly where the money came from. Because the reason why you have to provide proof of funds with each application you submit to Rocco is just to satisfy ISCC that the funds are not coming from the refugees that you're sponsoring, either directly or indirectly. And the more documentation you're able to provide, the more traceable that the funds are, the less concerns ISCC will have when it comes to the source of the funds. And this is something that you'll need to talk about with your CGs or co-sponsors, because it will also be a big change for them, because it's obviously a big change for you as SARS, because it's not a practice or a procedure that you're used to unless you've been involved in Group of 5 or community sponsorship, but it'll also be a change in how you operate and how you function with your CGs and co-sponsors. So if you need, or if you would like assistance with communicating these new requirements to your CGs and co-sponsors, please do reach out to your local RSTP trainer, and we'll be happy to come and speak to them about some of the proof of funds requirements that you have to follow, and why or how you can ensure that the funds that are being provided for a sponsorship are traceable and are documented, and the reasons why that needs to happen in order for the sponsorship application to be approved. Like I said, if you need more detailed training on proof of funds, we'll be more than happy to provide it on an ad hoc basis. And we may also be doing some more detailed training around proof of funds once the risk management plan is launched, because we understand this is a big change for you as SARS in risk management plan C, as well as for your CGs and co-sponsors. So this is the sponsorship cost table. If you're used to Group of 5, or if you're familiar with Group of 5 or community sponsor applications, you may also be familiar with the sponsorship cost table. It's a bit different to the wrap rates that you're used to. It's still categorized by family size, but it's not categorized by family composition. So if you remember, with the wrap rates, you specify your family size, you specify family composition, community of settlement, any specific needs like dietary needs, maternity, clothing, any specific needs that the newcomers may have, and then you calculate your rates based on that information. With the sponsorship cost table, this is used for all communities of settlement. So unlike the wrap rates, where there are specific rates for each province, this sponsorship cost table applies nationally to all provinces. And it's broken down by family size, and there's 2 categories. So you have your 12 months of income support, as well as your startup costs, and then the estimated total amount, which adds those 2 figures together. So for example, if me and Mysar, we were sponsoring a family of 1, let's say they're a single individual, we would need to ensure, and we're in risk management plan C, we would need to show at the application stage, we have $16,500 available to us before any in-kind deductions. And then obviously the amount increases as the family size increases. So it's a bit different to what you're used to doing with the RAP rates. But as a reminder, this is just an estimate. It's not the actual amount of financial support that you need to provide. Now, the reason why you would not use the RAP rates when you're completing the new undertaking and settlement plan form is because depending on family size, depending on family composition, depending on the community of settlement, the figure that you would get if you use the RAP rates may be higher or lower than the figure in the cost table. Because the cost table, like we said, it applies nationally across all provinces. But because the RAP rates are so province specific, and they're also dependent on family composition, any special needs the refugees may have, as well as a couple of other things, what you're calculating using the RAP rates may be higher or lower than the figure in the sponsorship cost table. That's why, I mean, if it's higher, it's not a huge deal because you're still hitting the minimum in the cost table for that family size. But if it's lower, then that application will not be approved by ROCO. So you need to make sure that you're using the cost table at the application stage, but when you're preparing for arrival, to calculate the actual level of financial support that US SARS are expected to provide, you have to still use the RAP rates. So I hope that distinction is clear. If you want me to talk about it a bit more, please just let me know via the chat or raise your hand. I'll be happy to go through it once more time. So with the sponsorship cost table, there's also an in-kind deduction table. And again, the in-kind deduction table is used for all locations across Canada, regardless of the province. And it specifies how much can be deducted for shelter, clothing, furniture, household needs, linens, school startup costs, and food staples, again, based on family size. Now, the same rules that you're used to with in-kind deductions apply here. If the value of the in-kind deductions exceeds the figure in the cost table, you have to go with the maximum amount in the table. You can't exceed the amounts in the cost table. In the in-kind deduction table. If the actual value of the in-kind deduction is lower than the figure in the in-kind deduction table, you go with that actual value amount. So the same rules that you're used to with applying in-kind deductions to RAP rates would apply here. But again, just as a reminder, you're using the cost table and in-kind deduction table to estimate the budget at the application stage. However, the actual amount of financial support you're expected to provide when the refugees arrive in Canada will be based on the Resettlement Assistance Program rates. So moving on to proof of funds. Now, using the cost table and the in-kind deduction table, you would get your estimate for a particular application package. And as a reminder, you have to submit proof of funds with each application once these risk management plans come into effect. Now, you have two ways of demonstrating to ISEC that your SAR has the necessary proof of funds. If you're familiar with community sponsorship, you might be familiar with these two methods as well. So the first way is through funds held in trust. That's where you collect the funds, you place them into an account that has been specifically designated for this particular application. You cannot combine funds from multiple sponsorship applications into one account. You have to have a separate account for each application package, and the funds would remain in that account until the refugee arrives in Canada. The funds need to be held in a Canadian financial institution, and they have to be held in Canadian dollars. And the funds cannot come from conditional sources of funding. So let's say you're working with a CG or a co-sponsor, and they say to you, you're sponsoring someone that's single, and you need a minimum of $16,500 from them to demonstrate proof of funds for that application. If they come to you and they say, yes, I have the $16,500, I just took a loan out last week, or I've remortgaged my house, and I was able to get the money through that way, those funds will not be accepted because they're conditional. And because they're predicated on a loan, or they're not non-conditional, those sources of funds will not be accepted. The funds cannot come from conditional sources of funding. So they have to be funds which are easily accessible, because as we know, processing times change. So let's say, for example, someone says, yes, I have the $16,500. I'm just going to withdraw it from my GIC account or my RRSP once my family arrives in Canada. Because processing times are unpredictable, and you could have applications which are processed very quickly or take a very long time to process, having funds that are from conditional sources of funding, you wouldn't be able to guarantee that those funds are necessarily available if the refugee arrives earlier than expected. Let's say the funds are in a GIC account or they're in an RSP account, and your CG or your co-sponsor says, yes, I can provide it once they arrive. I'm just going to withdraw it from those accounts when they arrive. You don't necessarily know when the refugees are going to arrive, given how unpredictable processing times are. So funds from conditional sources of funding will not be accepted. They have to be actual funds which your CGs, your co-sponsors, or you as a SAR that you actually have and are non-conditional. In terms of how you would demonstrate that you have funds in trust for a particular application, and this is all detailed in the new IMM 5413 guide in Appendix A, you would get a signed and stamped letter from the bank where the funds are held, and in that letter, it would specify who's the account holder, the value of the account, what the level of funds are in the account, how long the funds have been held in the account, and it has to be signed and stamped by the bank. You will also need to provide bank statements for each month since the account was opened. And the reason for that is because the funds have to remain in the account until the refugee arrives in Canada. So let's say January 1st, 2024 rolls around, and you're submitting an application that you've been working on. Let's say you're submitting the application in April 2024. You open up the account for this particular application in January 2024. You would need to include copies of financial statements for January, February, March, and April. So you need to provide all bank statements since the account was opened. And you also need to provide documentation to show how these funds were gathered. So if you remember a couple of slides ago, we spoke about documenting any fundraising activities, using traceable methods when accepting funds from CGs and co-sponsors, also never accepting cash, using checks, e-transfers, bank transfers, because you can easily provide documentation. The reason for that is because you will have to provide copies of that documentation with the application package that you submit. So that's funds held in trust. One thing I'd like to point out before we move on, even though you'll look at the guide and you'll look at Appendix A and you'll see the terms in trust, it doesn't mean it needs to be a formal trust account. Because one of the challenges with a trust account is the funds are locked away for a specific period of time. There's a trustee, a beneficiary. Almost all Canadian financial institutions will not open up a trust account where the beneficiary is somebody that's not in Canada. And because of the unpredictability around processing times, you don't know how long you need to have that trust account for. So you don't need to have a formal trust account where there's a beneficiary. You just need to have, typically for community sponsors and groups of 5, ISCC will accept a basic checkings or savings account. So don't be alarmed if you see the words in trust in the guide or if you see it on the slide. That's the term that ISCC uses, but it does not need to be a formal trust account. A basic checkings or savings account will be sufficient. So that's the first option, funds held in trust. That's where your CGs, your co-sponsors, they will transfer the money to you for that particular application. You'll open up a bank account, get the supporting documents from the bank, and the funds will stay in that account until the refugees arrive in Canada. The second way you can demonstrate proof of funds is, let's say you're working with an individual co-sponsor, and this is very specific to co-sponsors only. This would not work if you're working with a constituent group. Let's say you're working with a co-sponsor that's an individual. So not an organization, you're working with a co-sponsor that's an individual. If that individual comes to you and says, I don't have the money right now, but I have sufficient income and I can provide that money to the refugees when they arrive in Canada, that co-sponsor can pledge the funds from their personal income. What they would basically do is they would complete a financial profile form. So this is another new form. If you're not familiar with Group of 5 or community sponsor applications, it's the IMM 5373 form. They would complete a financial profile form, which you would include with the application. And in that financial profile form, they would detail like whether they're employed, they're self-employed, basically the sources of their personal income. They would specify what their personal income is, and then they would also need to provide you with a copy of their most recent notice of assessment so that ISCC has a piece of documentation where they can verify that individual's personal income. And then what ISCC will do, and what you as SARS may also want to do before you submit the application, just to make sure that that individual co-sponsor has sufficient funds, is to do this calculation that you see at the bottom of your screen. So basically, you would take the co-sponsor's gross income, and then you would subtract the co-sponsor's annual cost of living. Now, the figure that you would use for the annual cost of living will be based on the figures in the sponsorship cost table that we looked at earlier. So let's say, for example, I'm your co-sponsor, and let's say I'm single. I come to you and I say, I have sufficient income. Here's my notice of assessment. I completed the financial profile form. You would go through this calculation. And let's say my income is $20,000. And because I'm single, you would go to the cost table and you will see, okay, this person is single. They need $16,500 for their living costs. You would subtract $16,500 from my gross income, which is $20,000. And that would leave $3,500, which could be pledged towards this sponsorship. So you would basically subtract the annual cost of living for that particular co-sponsor. You would ask them, like, have you pledged any funds to other sponsorships? Like, are you involved in a Group of 5 that you might have pledged to? Have you been involved with a community sponsor application that you might have pledged to? If they have, you would further deduct that from their gross income. So let's say, again, I'm your co-sponsor. My gross income is $20,000. I'm single. You would initially deduct $16,500 from my gross income. From the $20,000, that would leave $3,500. And let's say I've pledged $1,000 to a Group of 5 application. You would then subtract that $1,000 from the $3,500. And what that would leave is the amount that I can pledge to this application. So that would effectively leave, in this example where I'm your co-sponsor, $2,500 that I'm able to commit to this application. So that's demonstrating proof of funds through pledges from a co-sponsor's personal income. I know it probably sounds complicated right now if you're not used to Group of 5 and community sponsor applications, but if you are working with a co-sponsor and they are pledging from their personal income, and you want someone to talk through this process with of doing this calculation, please reach out to your RSTP trainer, and also please reach out to your RSTP trainer if you have questions about the bank account requirements, if you're having funds held in trust, or the documentation that you need, the supporting documents that you need from a bank, or the supporting documents that you need to provide to show where the funds came from. We're here to help, and we're very used to doing these calculations and answering these types of questions for Groups of 5 and community sponsors, and we'd be more than happy to assist you as well as your CGs and co-sponsors if you have similar questions around proof of funds and the requirements and the supporting documents. So that's proof of funds. Very briefly going to touch on pre-arrival verification again. So if you remember way back at the beginning of this presentation, when we spoke about pre-arrival verifications, we said that ISCC will request updated proof of funds as well as a updated settlement plan. And because the undertaking and settlement plan have now been combined, you would basically be submitting one updated undertaking and settlement plan form. So an updated version of the combined undertaking and settlement plan, the IMM 5373, as well as proof of funds, and it would be the same thing that we went through on the previous slide. And as I've also mentioned already, we'll be doing detailed follow-on training for SARS in Plan B and C on the pre-arrival verification requirements, and we'll break down what you need to submit if you are randomly selected for a pre-arrival verification, but because these requirements only apply to cases submitted after or on or after January 1st, 2024, depending on processing times, you're likely not going to see the effect of this requirement for some time. And there will also be very specific instructions that ISCC sends to you if you are selected or one of your cases is selected for a pre-arrival verification. Okay, I've already been through these additional supports. For proof of funds, please reach out to your regional trainers. We also have the RSTP monthly webinar series. It is orientated towards groups of 5 and community sponsors, but if you attend the one on calculating financial support, we'll go through these requirements again, because the requirements for SARS in Plan C, when it comes to proof of funds, it mirrors the requirements for groups of 5 and community sponsors. So you're welcome to attend those monthly webinar series. You can also request a specific training for your SAR or your CGs or co-sponsors, and we're more than happy to work with you on that and help you deliver that training. And everything that we've been through regarding proof of funds, all of the new forms, details of all of that will be in the new IMM 5413 guide that is scheduled to be published on November 1st, 2023. Okay, a couple more slides on the PR portal. So this is scheduled to launch on November 1st, 2023, and hopefully you've already attended one of the information sessions that we've done on the digital portal. But in case you haven't, this is just a very quick reminder of some of the key features of the portal. So it is scheduled to launch on November 1st, 2023. Some of the forms, specifically the generic application form and the Schedule A form, will be fillable in the portal. So there'll be electronic versions of the form in the permanent residence portal, and you'll be able to invite the refugees into the portal so that they can complete their generic form as well as the Schedule A in the portal. Other forms, so all of the sponsors forms, so that new combined undertaking and settlement plan form, the sponsor assessment form if you're working with a CG or a co-sponsor, if you're working with a co-sponsor that is pledging from their personal income and they give you a financial profile form, all of those forms for the sponsors, plus the Schedule 2, where the refugee provides their case narrative, those will need to be uploaded into the portal. So you would still complete the PDF version on your computer or your desktop, laptop, and then you would still, and then what you would need to do is you would need to upload it into the permanent residence portal as an attachment. You would also need to upload any supporting documents into the portal, such as proof of Canadian citizenship, PR status, or registered Indian status for any of your CDs or co-sponsors, any supporting documents from the bank if you have proof of funds, a copy of your co-sponsor's notice of assessment if they're pledging from their personal income. All of those supporting documents will also need to be uploaded into the permanent residence portal. Now, the portal is scheduled to launch on November 1st, 2023. And when the portal launches, you will still be able to email your applications to Rocco, but that option of emailing applications to Rocco will end on December 31st, 2023. So when the portal launches, up until the end of the calendar year on December 31st, you can still carry on emailing your applications to Rocco, but for any applications submitted on January 1st, 2024 onwards, you will have to use the permanent residence portal in lieu of the emailed submission option, or you can submit your application to Rocco via mail. When it comes to the portal, you'll be able to invite your CGs or co-sponsors. You'll also be able to invite the refugee overseas. We understand that a lot of the refugees that you work with, they might not have access to a device or that is compatible with a portal, or they might not have access to internet or a data connection, which allows them to access the portal. If that's the case, they can still complete the PDF versions of the forms like they do now, email them to you, and then you complete the generic application form and Schedule A in the portal on your end. You'll also have the ability, if they do complete the generic application form and Schedule A in the portal, to view what they've completed, so you can check for any corrections that need to be made or any errors or mistakes. and you'll be able to review everything before it's submitted to Rocco. So that's the portal, scheduled to launch on November 1st, 2023. And we will be doing detailed walkthrough sessions, which will show you how to open up an account, how to invite your CGs, how to invite your co-sponsors, how to invite the refugee overseas, how to upload your forms, how to see what the refugee overseas has completed in the portal, how to upload the schedule to it, and then supporting documents, and submit everything to Rocco. So please visit our YouTube channel, and you'll be able to watch recordings of the Permanent Residence Portal information sessions on the YouTube channel. I promise I'm almost done. One final thing, digital signatures. So all the new forms will be able to be signed digitally, which is great because previously digital signatures were not accepted on any of the forms, but you'll now have that option. Let's say you're working with the Permanent Residence Portal and the refugee overseas, they don't have access, they don't have the ability to sign their forms via the portal, so they can still send the forms to you, and there's also a declaration form that they can sign and send that to you if they're not able to access the portal. But more information around how to sign PDF digitally is available in this hyperlinked video, and there'll also be more specific instructions, specifically as they relate to the forms, in the walkthrough sessions that we'll be doing. And that's everything. I'm done. Thank you for your patience. And just before we end, because I've made this offer multiple times throughout the presentation, if you would like to contact your local RSTP trainer, our contact details are on screen. We obviously have the centralized helpline that you can contact. I think most of you have our direct extensions already, but if you would like to get in touch with any one of us, you can find our contact details on the RSTP website, rstp.ca/